thank you all. Thank you all. It's great to be here with you this morning. President McGarvey, thanks for your introduction. I am glad to be with people who build things. You know, my mom and dad were dairy farmers. I'm the first person in my family to ever graduate from college, and one of the things you learn growing up on a dairy farm is how to build things. You may not always learn it exactly the right way, but you definitely learn it, whether it's putting a roof on the buildings or digging a foundation or whatever else needs to be done. We always figured out how to do it. Now, I would say my dad, who's 93 now, probably didn't have a whole lot of safety instructions in mind, because his most common thing to us when we were working, the thing you'd hear my dad say most often was, "Watch out." And both my sons and I have, over the years, commented a lot of times, it's a wonder nobody ever got hurt, but my dad must have always just said, "Watch out," quickly enough. I will tell you, my dad had a stroke about 3 weeks ago, so he's in rehab right now. But the day he had his stroke, he'd been out mowing his yard, came in to watch a Cardinals game for a while, and when the Cardinals game was over, he reached up to get his hat to go out the yard and finish the yard, and had that stroke and was rushed to the hospital, but didn't finish mowing the yard. I don't know what he's thinking. I knew eventually I'd have to step in and do something for him, but it was 93 years before I had to do it. But I am glad to be here with you. It seems to me that we are just 3 or 4 common sense decisions in our country for really good economic things happening. Now, one of them you just spent quite a bit of time hearing about, but I actually think it's worth repeating, because if there's a simpler formula than more American energy equals more American jobs, I don't know what that formula is. And it's not just the jobs to create the energy. That's the sort of the tip of the iceberg, but it's the jobs that occur when people believe there's a long-term utility bill they can pay and a delivery system that works. Lots of things are going to happen because of that. I just heard Mr. Farrell say that energy was the game changer, and certainly I think it's near the top of the list as a game changer. That's why when people see things, that's why the Keystone Pipeline that President McGarvey mentioned that I've been a big advocate for, when the Keystone Pipeline comes up, the pipeline itself is important. But I think to the American people, even more important, the pipeline has become a symbol, is are we going to wrap our arms around things that make good common sense and will help the future or not? So when people look at that and see us back off, and when they hear things said like, these jobs aren't permanent jobs, they're just construction jobs. What a foolish thing to say. You know, all construction jobs are temporary jobs because there's a start and a finish. In fact, that's one of the things I miss about what I do now. You don't have quite the same capacity you see when you start a project and you see it when you pull into a field to plow it or bale the hay and you turn around at the end of the day and it's done. Or when you build something, you see what you're doing. But obviously, construction jobs aren't designed to be permanent jobs, except maybe at the U.S. Capitol. Construction jobs are jobs that have a beginning and end, and they lead to other construction jobs. And you know, the key here is not how many people permanently run the pipeline. The key is how many people does it take to build it, and what else does it lead to? What other kind of jobs happen? And frankly, I think when you have a utility policy, an energy policy that heads in the right direction, the country's clearly ready to make things again. And an economy that makes things, and I want to go next to an economy that grows things, because that's another big potential for the future. An economy that makes things is stronger than an economy where people just trade services with each other. Now, there's nothing wrong with trading services, but if you do that on top of an economy that actually produces something, big things begin to happen. So energy policy that leads to manufacturing jobs, and I think you could argue that it may be certainly, if not the top thing, one of the top 1 or 2 things that determine where in the world today you're going to build something. Workforce matters, and it matters a lot, But the workforce, more people do fewer things all the time in manufacturing. The utility bill, however, is one of those things, whether it's a data center or a food processing facility or another kind of manufacturing facility that really matters. And world food needs are going to double in the next 55 years. Easy to say, but we haven't really begun to wrap our arms around that yet either. The great opportunity of where we live and who we are and what we do, world food needs are going to double between now and 2070. That's a marketplace that we would have never anticipated just a few years ago until we really got to this point. And of course, a lot of that food's going to be processed, but it all has to go somewhere. So an economy that makes things and grows things automatically leads to an economy that builds things. And if you have those three things going on, if you have those three kinds of competitive job opportunities going on, if you have those three things that are designed to produce incomes that families can live on, big things begin to happen in the economy, and you can see the factors coming together that would make that happen unless we decide to do things that aren't all that smart. We decide to do things that don't take advantage of the energy resources we have. We decide to do things that don't understand that whatever you add on to the traditional energy drivers that we have been used to in our lifetime are going to continue to be the main energy drivers for the world for some time. How do we use that in a way that competes and creates strong jobs? In manufacturing, Senator Brown from Ohio, Sherrod Brown and I teamed up together last year on one of the things we agree on. I'll just tell you, we don't agree on everything. The key to move the country forward is not to figure out what you don't agree on, it's to figure out what you do agree on and what you can do about that. And so Sherrod Brown and I introduced the Revitalizing American Manufacturing Act, and we got it passed in a Congress where getting things passed was tougher than any of us would have wanted it to be, but to create opportunities for advanced manufacturing and all other kinds of manufacturing. A utility bill you can pay, a delivery system that works is important, and where we live works. I live right in the middle of the country, our state in Missouri. I spoke to the Missouri General Assembly the other day and talked to them about the two things I just talked to you about. But I also said, and let's look at transportation as an important thing. I said, where we live, if you look at a highway map of America or a railroad map of America or a river map of America and focus in on where any of those three maps logically all begin to come together, you're looking at our backyard. And what do we do to take advantage of that? You know, if the river is right there, and by the way, I think with world food needs doubling, with manufacturing increasing, the Missouri River, the inland port facilities are about to be more important than they've been in 100 years. But if you get to the river and you can't get on it, there's no advantage to living near the river. We got to begin to think of the infrastructure that will allow us to compete, both domestically and around the world, and the kind of investment we need to make in that infrastructure. So Senator Bennett from Colorado and I, in the last Congress, introduced the Partnership to Build America Act, where we're looking for whatever new way we could find to encourage infrastructure needs of all kinds. And the city of St. Louis, part of the sewer system was built while Abraham Lincoln was president. Actually, it's amazing how long wood will last if you keep it totally underwater for 150 years. But it's still working, but it's not going to work forever. The infrastructure under the ground, the infrastructure on top of the ground, the highway system, I'm going to do everything I can to see that we come out of this Congress. The highway bill ends the end of May, a 6-month kicking the can forward. And by the way, you can't build roads and bridges 6 months at a time or 2 years at a time. You know, we need a 5 or 6 year highway bill that allows us to look at how we take advantage of who we are and where we live to have an infrastructure that works. And of course, once that happens, lots of other people do things around that. Senator Warner from Virginia and I had a bill that try to look at another funding mechanism for all kinds of infrastructure, but particularly building roads and bridges, take advantage of what we can to be sure that the economy works the way it can work in our country. We're unbelievably well located to be able to turn west when we need to turn west and east when we need to turn east. We've got neighbors on the north and south that are bigger partners of ours in energy and other things than they may have once. And how do you take full advantage of that in a way that creates jobs in this country that have the kind of take-home pay that can allow families to advance? How do you work at the training that needs to be done? President McGarvey mentioned I'm the chairman now of the Labor and Education and Health and Human Services Appropriations Committee. And one of the things I want to look at in that committee is how are these training programs working and how can we make them better? How can we take people with skills and put them together with people who need skills and make that work in a new and better way? You know, what we've seen recently in St. Louis particularly, Boeing was looking at whether they should locate some jobs in St. Louis or somewhere else in our country. The workforce stepped up. I was talking to Boeing often, but I was just as often talking to Jeff Abusi and Mike Lewis, and frankly, we didn't get that first round of jobs. But we've gotten a whole lot of jobs since then headed to St. Louis, both domestic and defense aviation jobs, and most of those jobs originally were scheduled to go somewhere else in the world, not the United States. When you begin to say, we want to make this happen, we want to do the common sense things that make this happen. We want to do the things that bring just good judgment. You know, there's a couple of rules and regulations out there right now that I think make virtually no sense at all. EPA has a clean power rule that even if the goal is worthy, the calendar that affects that goal is not. There are times when there are places you want to go, but it doesn't make sense to get there too fast. What we don't want to do is raise our utility bills to the point that jobs go somewhere else. The determination of where those jobs are, you know, poor people, young people, most hurt by utility bills that are higher than they need to be. People that can barely pay their utility bill now. You know, I've lived in houses, and some of you have too, where we decided when in the wintertime which rooms we were going to be able to heat and which ones we weren't. And the ones you weren't, if you've ever experienced that, you remember rolling up the rug and putting it in front of the door of the room you weren't going to heat that year because you didn't think you could afford to. With the energy opportunities we have, we don't need families having to make those kinds of choices. Our young people not have jobs they would have had if the utility bill would have been right-sized. We need to be sure that we're doing things that don't drive jobs to countries that care a whole lot less about what comes out of the smokestack than we do. That's the lose-lose of economic development, not the win-win. Or the EPA having jurisdiction over all the water in the country. Somebody needs to be concerned about water in the country, but the closer you are to where the problem is, the more likely you're going to get a quick and common sense decision. There's a new movie out, the new Star Wars movie's about to come out. Certainly the funniest of all the Star Wars genre of movies was the great movie Spaceballs. This is the one where Rick Moranis played Dark Helmet. Only the most sophisticated here would have seen this movie, Spaceballs. But in Spaceballs, there's a speed above hyperspeed. Several people know this, I can tell. There's a speed above hyperspeed, ludicrous speed. We don't want the regulators to be allowed to get into ludicrous speed. We want to take common sense and good judgment. We want to take a workforce that's ready to work, a utility bill that can be paid, energy resources that work to our advantage, and the kind of partnerships it takes for us to move forward. A lot of things have been said here today and need to continue to be said about what we need to do to build those partnerships. Not only in the labor appropriations bill, but in the things that relate to opportunity, I'm going to continue to reach out and find people on both sides of the aisle that I can work with on whatever issue I can work with them on, to be sure that we have that kind of environment to produce that kind of jobs and those kinds of paychecks for American families. Thank you all for letting me come today. Thank you all.